All right. Good morning and welcome back to another morning episode of the Liberty Dad podcast, a discussion on politics and culture. For tuning in live, thank you so much for giving me your time so early. Do me a favor, folks. If you like this show, make sure to hit that like and subscribe button. Where am I? There's my button. There it is. And for the really serious folks out there, go ahead and hit that bell so that you never miss an episode. All right, we are back at it. Hope everybody had a wonderful Thanksgiving. If you celebrate, if you do not celebrate, well, then I just hope you had a great week last week doing whatever it is that you were up to. So let's see what we got here. A couple comments here. Time surfing alien jumping right in saying happy holidays and to you as well. And then Keith Garrett here is time to watch Die Hard and Hogfather. Did you mean Dogfather or is that Hogfather? I'm not really sure, but nonetheless, Hogfather sounds very interesting. So welcome back. Hope you guys had some great holidays. You might notice here that I've got this like ratty hat on, this ratty ball cap. That is because in the course of traveling, I lost my good one. So I guess I'll have to get a new one, but that's where we are. Otherwise, I had a great week up in Michigan. It was insanely cold. It got down to like 19 degrees. We were at an arcade. Me and my family, we all took our kids to this arcade, which was a whole lot of fun, by the way. It's great nostalgia. We went to this arcade and I went out to warm up the car. And there was a young guy out there, maybe like 25. And I was just like, wow, man, it's really cold out. And this is like 6 p.m. in the evening. So it was pretty cool. It wasn't like nighttime cold, but it was pretty cold. We got past the quote unquote warmer part of the day. And I was like, man, it's really cold. I was like, I'm from Florida. I was like, this is awful. And he laughed and he said, I've grown up here and lived here my whole life. This is pretty nice. And it was like 19 degrees. And this young guy was like, it's pretty nice. And I was like, wow, just amazing. Anyway, so that was my week, just fighting the cold, but having a lot of fun with family. And now we're back and we're at it. Uh, sad thing to note. There were some things that I wanted to have done by today, and I didn't get a single thing done. Unfortunately, just because time just went, just really, really went. Anyway, what are we talking about today? We're going to be talking about the pardon that President Joe Biden has given his son, Hunter Biden. I saw an interesting clip from Sam Harris talk about public intellectuals. And then we'll wrap it up by talking about one of Trump's nominees, his nominee for director of the FBI, Kash Patel. So let's get into this pardon issue here. Let's see. Let's pull up. We'll start with this. We'll start with an image here. So here we go. This is just a little description. So if you're not familiar with what's going on, here's a little highlight. It says President Joe Biden has granted a pardon to his son, Hunter Biden, for any offenses he might have committed from 2014 to 2024. This decision was announced just before a potential sentencing for federal tax and gun charges. The scope of the pardon, covering a decade, is noted as being exceptionally broad, drawing comparisons to historical presidential pardons like that of Richard Nixon. So that was just like a nice little summary that you can find on Twitter. But let's start with this. Number one, taxes, drugs, drug and gun possession, like not paying taxes, and then possession of drugs and guns. Those should not be crimes. Period. It's a plain and simple. So I'm not mad at him over that. Okay, fine. I probably would too. Like most fathers probably would. Like just having a gun, having some drugs at the same time while you're addicted. And then I think he falsified some of his documents. He lied. Administrative crimes are not really high on my priority list at all. And then taxation is theft. So as a libertarian, I can't fault somebody for not wanting to pay taxes because let's be honest, when you don't pay taxes, what are you actually doing? You're just keeping what you earned. That's it. Yeah, you're not taking from somebody else, right? Like if I earn money from somebody and then I don't pay taxes on it, all I've done is kept what I've earned. And this is an idea that we need to really, really work on getting through to Americans. Now, we can have an argument later, should there be any taxes whatsoever? If there are taxes, what should they go toward? Those are all arguments we can have. But we should start with the fundamental notion that taxation is theft because it is taking from money from somebody that they've earned, usually honestly, but they've earned, and they don't want to be taken, because otherwise it would be a donation. Like if I give the government money for some reason, let's say the local government's like, hey, we're trying to raise money to build a brand new library, and we don't want to charge taxes for it. So what we're going to do is we're just going to create a fund, and people can donate to it, and we'll keep records of everything. And if we donate at this particular level, then we will build a brand new library. Well, that would be a donation. Totally fine with donations. So we're good there. So let's take a look at his pardon, and we'll read through it. It's not very long, and we'll see what it says, and we'll talk about it a little bit. But on the surface, I'm not really angry about this. Like, okay, whatever. There are plenty of other things in the world to concern ourselves with. All right, so here we go. Let's see. Statement from President Joe Biden. Today, I signed a pardon for my son, Hunter. From the day I took office, I said I would not interfere with the Justice Department's decision making, and I kept my word, even as I watched my son being selectively and unfairly prosecuted. Well, Mr. President, tell your son to join the club. This has happened all across America for many thousands, millions of people, right? Like that's just the reality. So your son is basically facing what the everyday average Joe might have to, without aggravating factors uh, like use in crime, multiple purchases, or buying a weapon as a straw purchaser. People are almost never brought to trial on felony charges solely for how they filled out a gun form. Now, I can't argue with that because I don't know, but I do know that when it comes to prosecuting people, there are many things that play out. So people will give you plea deals. They'll say, hey, they'll scare you into, confessing, and all. They'll do all these things. And we can make an argument about whether or not that's actually a true, uh, that is the best way for justice to play out, right? Like if I get accused of a crime, and let's say I get accused of crime A and crime B, and crime B is the worst one, and maybe they don't quite have the what they need to convict me for crime B, but they got plenty for crime A, which is a minor crime, right? Maybe I stole something, and but they've also accused me of, you know, killing somebody. Okay, so they may not have the evidence to get me on killing somebody, but they might have plenty of evidence to get me on the theft. So they might use those as leverage to get a little bit more out of A than out of B. Like, hey, we don't have the evidence. We don't have enough here to convict him for B. We have plenty for A, but we want to make sure that he gets more. We believe that he did B, but we want to make sure that he gets, he's made an example of, or we want to make sure that that we get him as hard as we can on A. So we might offer him a deal, right? Because I might not know any better, and they might say, well, we're going to offer you this plea deal if you plead guilty, right? And if you don't plead guilty, then we're going to come at you really hard, right? I don't know that that's really like, is that how we should see justice? I don't think so. It's not really. I mean, think about it this way: if you've done something wrong, you should pay the proper penalty for it, and it should be proportional to what you did wrong. If you slap somebody, whatever penalty you pay should be proportional to slapping somebody. If you assault them and like stab them in the leg, then that should be the punishment should be proportional to that. And there really shouldn't be a whole lot of negotiation based on the level of evidence that you have. So I can't speak to whether or not people are ever brought to trial, but I can tell you that my understanding is that there are things that play out that you could argue are not really how justice should be served. Anyway, let's continue. Those who were late paying their taxes because of serious addictions but paid them back subsequently with interest and penalties are typically given non criminal resolutions. It is clear that Hunter was treated differently. It's possible. I'm not going to argue. If you ask somebody that pays attention, and you say, "Tell me about a case where somebody was treated unfairly," chances are they've got a name or two, right? Like anybody that pays attention to the news and really watch, the news junkies, like they're gonna know some names. They're gonna have some ideas about somebody. Like a lot of people would argue that Trump was treated differently, unfairly, right? But it goes from high level down to the common man. So this, like, okay, I don't necessarily disagree, right? Like it could happen. It could be that people were singling him out because they wanted to come after Joe Biden. And what better way to get at somebody than to put their son into jail? Also, it seems like his son was mixed up in a bunch of things and, at least according to our law, might actually should be in jail. According to some of the laws that President Biden himself signed or supported, the 1994 crime bill, by virtue of those things, then maybe your son should have seen some jail time. And so maybe the people that are treating him differently aren't just those who oppose you. Maybe it's his dad, because you sure didn't seem to be pushing to get him into jail. I'm just saying, like, if we're going to be honest, we're going to put our cards on the table and say, look, let's talk about this fairly. All right. Fair is fair. People might be treating him differently because he's your son. You are probably treating him differently because he's your son. The charges in this case come about only after several of my political opponents in Congress instigated them to attack me and oppose my election. Then a carefully negotiated plea deal, wonder who just talked about that, agreed to by the Department of Justice, unraveled in the courtroom, with a number of my political opponents in Congress taking credit for bringing political pressure on the process. Had the plea deal held, it would have been a fair, reasonable resolution of Hunter's cases. No reasonable person who looks at the facts of Hunter's cases can reach any other conclusion than Hunter was singled out only because he was my son, and that is wrong. Now, what he's not saying is my son, is or is not guilty. He's like, look, you're just singling him out because he's my son. Well, okay, but did your son break the law as written as you supported? Like, that's a big question here. If we, like I have my views on what the law should be and who should be penalized and for what. But as it stands right now, it sounds like he's also playing favoritism. Uh, there's been an effort to break Hunter, who has been 5.5 years sober. Good for him, even in the face of unrelenting attacks and selective prosecution. In trying to break Hunter, they've tried to break me, and there's no reason to believe it will stop here. Enough is enough. For my entire career, I've followed a simple principle: just tell the American people the truth. I almost couldn't say that sentence because I don't believe that virtually any politician can actually say that with honesty. just don't believe it. Here's the truth. I believe in the justice system, but as I have wrestled with this, I also believe raw politics has infected this process and it led to a miscarriage of justice. And once I made this decision this weekend, there was no sense in delaying it further. I hope Americans will understand why a father and a president would come to this decision. Okay. So he's invoking being a father. So clearly he understands, like, hey, I'm a dad. I don't want to see my son in prison. I'm going to use my power of the president to make sure that doesn't happen. It goes down here to all to all to whom these presents shall come, greeting. Be it known that this day I, Joseph R. Biden, Junior President of the United States, pursuant to my powers under Article 2, Section 2, Clause 1 of the Constitution, have granted unto Robert Hunter Biden a full and unconditional pardon for those offenses against the United States which he has committed or may have committed or taken part in during the period from January 1, 2014 through December 1, 2024, including but not limited to all offenses charged or prosecuted by Special Counsel David C. Weiss in the United States District Court for the District of Delaware. And that's it. And then he just basically signs it. So he basically gave him he's like, look, for this 10-year period, if you did anything, where to go here? If you did any offense against the United States, I'm pardoning you. Now, what I'm not clear about is whether or not you can actually pardon somebody before we have like went to trial and before we have, like said, hey, you're accused of this particular crime. We're going to take it to trial. We're going to, see how things play out. I don't know if you can actually pardon somebody in that way. I mean, I guess you can, I assume, but it seems kind of odd to me that you would pardon somebody for crimes that we may or may not even know about. So he said, because he says anything within this 10-year period. Now, a lot of people are pointing out that it has something to do with Burisma. I get it. I'm not really going to get it. I don't personally, I just don't think that we need to get that deep into it. I'm not, it's a pardon. Presidents pardon people all the time for whatever reason, usually political reasons, in my opinion. I don't think that too many presidents actually pardon people because they really believe that there was a problem here that they need to address. I mean, that's ideally what it was for, but that's probably not really what happens. They usually pardon people, maybe as a campaign promise. Like, so for instance, Trump has promised to free Ross, and part of it, it was interesting. It's interesting, like the conversation in the libertarian community. A lot of people are like, well, if he frees Ross, it'll be a great thing. And we negotiated that deal, right? Well, I want you to think about something. He doesn't seem to be freeing Ross because he himself looked at it and said, no matter what, I'm going to free this guy because there was a miscarriage of justice. But many people in the libertarian community, Libertarian Party, are excited and ecstatic that it will happen, or that it might happen, which they should be. I get it. But they don't seem to be pointing out that, like a lot of people are like, well, is he going to do it because it was conditional on votes? So I want you to think about that for a second. That is not really correcting a miscarriage of justice. I mean, it is for the person being pardoned, but it's not like if they're just doing it as a political favor, then we're not really at a point where we need to be with pardons. All right, so let's see. Some interesting things that came up about this particular pardon. So here, people are calling back to, I think it was earlier this year, May, where Joe Biden said no one is above the law, and then he got community noted, or it was a suggested note. I don't know if it actually went through or not, but it says Joe Biden has pardoned his son, Hunter Biden, of all criminal convictions on December 1st, 2024. According to Joe Biden's actions, he and his son are, in fact, above the law. Okay, let me just throw this out there. I don't think so. I really don't think that shows that he's above the law. The law says the president can pardon anybody they want for any reason they want. It doesn't say that, you know, you can only pardon them under certain circumstances, or it can't be your, family member or somebody close to you. It doesn't say any of that. It just says you can pardon somebody, period. For whatever reason you want. So he can pardon him, and it is clearly within the boundaries of the law. That's why he's able to do this. So I think actually, if this is a real community note, I think it's wrong. Period. Whether you like it or not, and trust me, I've no love for the president. Okay. In fact, I wish you guys would quit making me have to defend him every now and then. But here's the thing. You can argue with the details of it and say, hey, I think that a decade-long pardon and a very generic one is inappropriate. But again, it's not above the law. You could, because it's his discretion. Here's the real problem: there are too few pardons, and there are too many crimes that shouldn't be crimes in the first place. If you falsify, like if you are filling out a federal form and you're like, nope, I'm not addicted to drugs. Can I have my gun, please? And then they're like, oh, you lied. Like, for starters, that shouldn't be a question on the form in the first place. And we can argue whether you should have a form in the first place, right? So, no form and no question asking about this. You should be able to have a firearm. Why? Because self defense is a basic right for anybody, including addicts. Everybody should have the right to self defense. So, like for me, I look at it and I say, the real issue that we should be talking about, instead of, oh, he pardoned his son, which again, we've kind of already established, most every dad would, is one, the details. We can focus on the details and say, hey, I think you went too far with this, even if it is within your power, your legal power to do so. We can also argue and say, you know, should you have done it with your son? But I think a better question is say, how come you're not pardoning more people? Why didn't you find other people that had some level of miscarriage of justice and say, you know what? Like, here's what I would have loved to see President Biden come out and say, my son was treated unfairly and it got me to thinking. So I asked some of my people, I sent an aide and I said, you go find other people that have been sitting in prison who maybe not a similar situation, but a similar miscarriage of justice. And you bring those names to me and we're going to review them and I'm going to sign as many pardons as I can. And then you can come out and say, look, I'm pardoning my son because, I can, but it got me to thinking, I want this for other people. That's what I would have liked to see. That would have been great. And I think that would have sent a real message regarding miscarriage of justice. Because if you just do one person and it's close to your family, it's a close family member, that's not really that's not really showing that you care about true justice. That just says, in my particular case, my son, I say that he has had a miscarriage of justice. And so since I have the power, I'm going to do something about it. Okay, great. What about everybody else's son? What about somebody's daughter, dad, mother, other people? But he doesn't have a long, and he could do this in a day. He could say, all right, he could say on Monday, you go out and you find me names. I want no less than 100 names. We'll just say that. And then he can, he can give all the criteria, you search out, you fully vet this, yada, yada, make sure that, we're pardoning people that really, really should get a pardon. And then they bring those names back and he can just say like, look, I'm doing it to I'm pardoning my son because he's my son and because I'm the president. And if he really, really wants to make a dent, he could say, I can't do anything about, the law, I don't have the power to change the law on these particular things, but I want to send a strong message about this law. And I want to pardon all these people because hopefully this will start a conversation that our laws need to change. They need to get better. We need to focus more on actual justice. And maybe some things shouldn't even be crimes in the first place. That would have sent a much better message. But he's not really, I mean, he's just saying all the words again. But again, it's not, I don't think they're above the law, right? Because the law says he can pardon people, period. All right. What else we got? We got Matt Walsh said something interesting, and I kind of disagree with him. Let's take a look at what Matt Walsh said. All right, here we go. All right. So Matt Walsh says any attempt to justify this pardon as Joe, quote, looking out for his son, end quote, falls apart for three reasons. Number one, he directly lied to the American people about it. That cannot be morally justified. Okay. I mean, yes, he lied. Like, he said he wasn't going to pardon his son, and then he did. And of all things that politicians lie about, this is the one we're going to stand on our, we're going to get morally righteous about saying that he's not going to pardon his son, but then turning around saying, yeah, I'm going to pardon him now. That's the one. That's the lie that we care about. Okay, Matt Walsh, I'm glad that this was important enough to worry about that. That's the moral thing that we should be really talking about, is that he said he wouldn't do it. Nothing else that Joe Biden or any other politician has done, those aren't the things we need to talk about. This one. Okay. Now I get it. He's making a point about this particular case. But again, he said, this looking out for a son falls apart. Well, I think it only falls apart if you're applying things selectively, right? Or narrowing in on something that's trivial. And in this particular case, I think a pardon for your son, just on that grounds, not necessarily details, but a pardon for your son that you said you weren't going to do, I think that's a trivial detail. I don't care. Of all, like that lie, I'm fine with. Okay, whatever. There are much bigger lies that I think we should be worried about. This one is not even on my radar. He says, number two, he gave his son a pass for all federal crimes committed over 11 years. Insulating your adult child from rightful consequences to that extent is, among other things, enormously crappy parenting. As parents, our greatest duty is to help our children to develop virtue. Giving them a hall pass for federal crimes obviously does the opposite. Now, that's true. I'm not going to argue that. But let me just point out something. Hunter Biden is 54. Joe Biden is 82. Parenting is pretty much complete at this point. He is not there. There is no more parenting to be done here. Like, he's not gonna like if you get to the point where your 54-year-old son could be guilty of federal crimes, you've long since passed the whole parenting thing. Like, doing like you made some mistakes somewhere, potentially. I mean, there might be some we might find some people where, hey, maybe you actually really did everything you could. You just had a child that just wanted to go their own way. Okay, fine. Right. But if we're going to be talking about parenting and whether or not you're being a good parent, those days are long since past. So I don't know that that's really an impressive argument. I mean, it's technically true. Like, yes, when I'm 80, my son, I should have the same amount of, I should have the same attitude toward him regarding what he should and should not do in the world as I do now, right? Like, I shouldn't really be a different person per se. But if I get to be 82 and I've allowed some of these things to happen all along, that's not really much of an argument anymore because we're done with that. He's already shown what kind of parent he is. So whatever. Third one, most importantly, so this is the most important one. So maybe this one will be a good argument. He's clearly doing this to protect himself first and foremost. I mean, probably. But also, again, President Biden is 82. There's not that much personal protection needed at this point. I mean, what are you going to do? The man, like, Republicans and people that, oppose Joe Biden have been talking about him being old and senile for a very long time. So at this point, if the Republicans wanted to go after him, they're going after an 82-year-old man who's old and senile, and they would be like, we're going to punish him for whatever things that he's done wrong, right? And 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 so, like, does the population have the stomach for that? Or are they going to look and say, he's old and senile, it doesn't matter anymore. Move on. Let's figure it out in a different way. That's probably what's going to happen. People don't generally like throwing old people in jail. Like, I mean, I know there's some people out there that might be like, I don't care. He's a tyrant. Throw him in jail. Like, I get it. But I think overall, the majority of the population isn't going to go for that. I mean, half of them voted for him. Well, half of the ones that voted, right? So I just don't think it's strong. I think Matt is just really stretching here. And again, that's not to say that Hunter Biden didn't do anything wrong. That's not to say that he shouldn't have faced some level of charges or justice. I'm not saying that. I'm only saying that I don't think this is much of there's not much here anymore. The president has the power to pardon. He decided to pardon. He did it for a length of time. He did it kind of broad. We can argue about that and say, whether or not he should have, but he was within his legal rights to do so. This was within the law to do that, as far as I know. So unless somebody can show me that there's a limit on the pardon, like you can't pardon somebody for crimes that haven't been at least convicted of, well, maybe that's fine. And maybe that's the case. And if that is the case, well, then go ahead and prosecute Hunter Biden for it. But I don't think these are good arguments, and I think people just nearly need to move on. And if they're going to focus, if you are going to focus on the details should be that not enough people are pardoned, and that some things shouldn't be crimes in the first place. That should be what we focus on. And if we're not focusing on that, honestly, I don't give a damn. I really just don't care. Like, pardon your son, move on, whatever, you know, period. Is he protecting him from the Trump administration? Maybe, whatever. Don't care. I don't care. I only care about, are we going to extend this to more people? And if we're not, then we're not having a serious conversation, and zip it. Let's move on. Find something else. All right, let's see. Let's check in on the comments and see. I'm going to try to, when we talk about these subjects, I'm going to try to get into the comments sooner than later. Let's see. Here you go. This is funny. Maybe Hunter can write a tell-all book and make some honest money. Fair enough. I like it. That'd be a good thing. He's not turning over a new leaf, but hey, if he's doing what he should be doing in the first place, which is making honest money, fine, whatever. Let's see what else. What else we got here? Oh yes, this is a good one from Time Surfing Alien. I still want to know whose cocaine was it. We're talking about the cocaine in the White House that they found. Remember that story? They found the cocaine in the White House, and I was like, "Wow, how did this get in here?" Like, but now whether Hunter Biden himself brought it in or any one of the other myriads of people that go through the White House, if you think about it, it's probably true that that cocaine has been in the White House used for decades, right? It's a place where there's a lot happening. They want people, sharp. They're pushing them. They're probably working long hours. Some of them. I don't doubt that there are drugs in use in the White House any more than I understand that corporate America has a lot of drug users. Right? People are using drugs to enhance their performance, take a little edge off, whatever, any number of reasons, right? So I'm not surprised. And I wouldn't be surprised if this were the case. But it would be interesting to know, since they did find it and since they did talk about it. Like, well, fine. Now that you've mentioned it, you brought it up. Like, whose was it? Did you find out? Did you ever did we figure that out? I don't know. All right, let's see. What else? Do. Jail is not enough for Biden. I could agree. In fact, I would agree with that for every single president, because I believe they are all war criminals. So there's that. All right, let's move on. What do we got here? You ever heard of the term public intellectual? It's a person who is well known to the general public for their willingness to comment on current affairs and participate in public discourse. Wait a minute. That's very generic. A person who is well known. Ah, dang it. Okay. So once I get well known, I can be a public intellectual. But until then, I've just got the willingness to comment on current affairs and participate in public discourse. So Sam Harris, when I was growing up, he was one of the four horsemen for atheism. And he recently come out and he's been critical of Elon Musk. Now, I've not been too impressed with him lately, just some of the things that I've seen come out with Sam Harris. And it's funny because when I was younger, I would see things from him more along the lines of like philosophy and religion, atheism, Christianity and stuff. And I always thought he was kind of like an intellectual powerhouse. And maybe he was. I didn't, it's only lately in the last maybe 5 to 10 years that I've really considered, what does it mean to be an intellectual heavyweight? And what's the criteria, and, are we applying it properly and all that good stuff? But so maybe he was, and maybe he's changed. I've seen some people suggest that. But let's take a look at this clip here, because I think it's very interesting. So what do we got here? Boom, 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 boom.
I mean, some of these guys are friends, some of these guys are
Sure.
former friends, some of these guys are now proper enemies, I'm happy to talk about all of them. But I think so. The phrase "public intellectual" is one that I will speak happily and without scare quotes, because I think we need public intellectuals. I don't think that's an embarrassing label, and I aspire to earn it.
Okay, so I like this already, right? Like, okay, I'm cool with the idea of public intellectuals. I think we need to be very careful on who gets to be one. I think it's probably best is if it remains something that's based largely on the crowd, not other intellectuals. So if the public sees somebody as a very intelligent commentator on topics, then the public can uh, kind of like elevate them to a status of public intellectual. But I don't think this should be a situation where you have other public intellectuals who are say, yeah, he's a public intellectual because, and we'll get into it more, but this I think is the best way. Like if we're going to talk about something being public, then it has to be driven by the public. And I think he doesn't really get into that, but I'm comfortable with the idea. And like you said, it has to be earned, which means you have to put your ideas to the test. You have to be willing to take whatever scrutiny comes your way. So I'm kind of on board already.
But I think it's important to notice about a lot of these guys is that though they are smart, they're not intellectuals, right? They're not attempting to have anything like a truly honest and comprehensive worldview that they can defend from all sides, and that they'll revise in real time in front of you when you push back on some squirrely part of it, in a way that proper academics and journalists and real public intellectuals will, right? I mean, I guess I'm describing
Sure.
something like an ideal, but it is just, you just cannot say that someone like Elon Musk is an intellectual, right? He's obviously very smart. He's obviously a talented engineer, but when you prod him and get his take on world events or on the future of humanity, you get like 15 lines of boilerplate that he hasn't revised in the last decade and a half about.
Okay. So let's stop here for a second. Number one, whether or not Elon Musk is a public intellectual, again, in my view, should be determined by the public. Now, I think he is correct in saying just because somebody's very, very smart doesn't necessarily mean that they get to be a public intellectual. There are plenty of smart people out there, maybe smart engineers, smart astrophysicists, physicists who want to comment on public policy and all kind of things that are related to the public news, stories of the day, that kind of thing. And they're not very good at it. Like you might be great in this area. Like there are people out there that have studied and worked hard, learned, read, debated, had their ideas challenged in a particular area, and then they step out into a different area and they it's like they want to carry their credentials in a sense, from this area to this other area. It's like, nope, you got to start over. If I learn chemistry and I'm a great chemist, but then I decide I want to learn electrical engineering, well, there may be some principles that apply, but I'm still learning a new field. And so there are many new things that I'm going to have to learn. And I don't just necessarily get to say, well, because I'm an expert here, what I have to say here is good. It may or may not be. Right. But the interesting thing is like, he's like, hey, Elon Musk. And again, it's possible that Elon Musk is just a smart guy and not a public intellectual. Right. And that's a fair, you could make that argument. And I think there's an argument to be made that very smart people are not necessarily public intellectuals. But the real question is like, well, Elon Musk has held these ideas for a long time. They're boilerplate and he's never revised them. But the question that Sam Harris doesn't answer is why would he need to revise them? Is there something wrong with these ideas? Like whatever ideas they might be. And I think this is the problem with many public intellectuals. They seem to believe that society must just continually change to show progress, not change because this idea is better than this idea. Like, you know, we had this idea for many, many years. And then eventually we determined, you know what? It's actually not a good thing. Let's change that. And hey, progress. Great. I'm okay with that. But the idea, it's almost like their idea of progress is change for the sake of showing change. No, if you want to talk about Elon needing to revise some of his ideas, number one, you have to state which ideas. Which ideas does he hold that need to be revised, and why do they need to be revised? Why are they not good, just as good today as they were, say, maybe 10 years ago or 20 years ago? Because some things are like some things I believe are have stood the test of time, and it is a good idea regardless of where society is, whether we were living, in as nomadic people running around in small little communities, or now where we have big metropolises. Like, it doesn't matter. Like, some ideas just withstand the test of time. So, as a public intellectual, presumably some people think of Sam Harris, he's already made a major mistake because he's already assuming, without evidence, that Elon Musk has ideas that he must revise and that he should. Okay, fine, but you haven't demonstrated why. Let's continue.
Us having to be a multiplanetary species and blah blah blah. Um, and with a lot of these guys, you have people whose formative experience intellectually was their first encounter with Ayn Rand and science fiction.
Okay, and so what? Like, I don't know what that this sounds perilously close to a lot of people who say, I was a libertarian once when I was a teenager, or I read Ayn Rand once when I was in college. And then they kind of imply that they've grown up since then. And I'm not making an argument necessarily for any of Ayn Rand's ideas. However, many of her ideas still hold true today. So, or you could be, at least they could be argued today, right? For instance, one idea that she had was that the individual is the smallest minority. Well, I think that's true. And I think that's something that we could continue to argue to this day. So the idea that somebody just, oh, you were in your formative years, you were influenced by somebody like Ayn Rand, or you were reading a lot of science fiction. Okay, well, as we see, there's a lot of science fiction that seems to be playing out as it was once described. So it seems like some of these science fiction writers might have had a little prescience to them. They're not just making up things and then, oh, wow, look at that. Just coincidence that what I wrote about 50 or 100 years later has come to play out in some similar manner. It's probably because they understood certain ideas that transcend time and transcend the changes that society has made. So again, we go back to this notion of, okay, if you want to say that some ideas are no good, you need to describe why these ideas are no good. And it's possible, there's any number of ways you can look at that, right? You can say, well, some ideas were never any good, but they were fun to write about. Okay. You could also say some ideas were fun to write about and fun to read about, and they had their time and place, but those particular ideas did not transcend time. They did not transcend the changes that we see in society. So therefore, they're antiquated, and here we can demonstrate why. Then you're going to have some ideas, and there may be other categories, but then you're going to have some ideas that they're good, they're fun to write about, they're fun to read about, maybe not fun to read about, but they do transcend. And they were written 100 years ago, and 100 years later today, they're still good ideas. So I don't, like, again, as somebody who might want to be seen as a public intellectual, he's not faring so well in this clip, because he seems to be implying things without providing evidence as to why we should see it like that also. Let's continue. What else he got to say?
And then they I'm sure many of them read, but they read quite idiosyncratically. They're self-taught in basically everything, other than in some cases computer science and maybe in Elon's case engineering. Even there, I think he's largely self-taught. And a lot of these guys show all the scars of being autodidacts. And yeah, it's not to say that I'm not advocating for mere credentialism. I'm not saying you need a PhD in the thing you talk about and you can only talk about that thing. I mean, obviously, I don't observe those boundaries intellectually myself, but some of us have internalized the standards of academic and journalistic integrity in a way that others haven't. Right?
Okay. So I think this is very interesting because he's like, look, I don't want to get into credentialism, basically saying, hey, what are your credentials? We saw that during COVID. If you looked at data and you made an assessment, the first thing people asked, they were like, well, are you an immunologist? Are you a data scientist? Are you a this? Are you a that? It was like, well, no, but I can read, and either I have read and understood this material and the assessment that I'm giving you is accurate, or I have missed something here, right? And it is not accurate. It's pretty simple. But one thing that's never really questioned here by him is this, and really by public intellectuals in general, and which I think defeats his "I'm not trying to credentialism," is that we're not questioning the veracity and the ubiquity of journalistic and academic integrity. I mean, and I mean that wide scale. I don't mean like there's nobody doing it. I'm saying in like there are many intellectuals out there that don't come out and say, you know what, maybe it's not as true that journalists and academics have the level of integrity that we say they do or say they should have. Maybe it's not as ubiquitous. Maybe it's not really out there. And maybe it does need to be challenged because of that reason. Now, that's not to say it isn't there at all, but it's only to say it's not unreasonable to have doubts and questions. I mean, that's the point of ideas. The arena of ideas is that I bring forward an idea, somebody else challenges it, and we have maybe rigorous debate, and then we figure out where we land. And that should apply to the idea that there's journalistic and academic integrity at such a level that we can talk about it as being a thing. I think because it's not being questioned, because they're not really questioned, they're just kind of taking it for granted. They're saying, okay, well, um, this is a thing, right? And we need more people to exist within this realm. These autodidacts, why they don't have the stamina for this kind of integrity that people that went through more formal training have. Okay, well, that needs to be challenged. And when it's not challenged, then it leads to credentialism. So he kind of defeats his own argument there. Now, hopefully, the obvious answer is that we evaluate ideas on the basis of whether or not they are good or bad, just like what I'm doing here. Right? I'm looking at it and I'm saying, okay, Sam Harris. Some people might see him as a public intellectual. Some people might not. Whatever. Here's this idea that he said. Here is me challenging some of the components of his idea. This is exactly what we should be doing. And we should do it on everything. And we should say, hey, look, if you're a journalist, are you actually adhering to any, any um, level of integrity that's expected? And if you're not, how many others are also not? And if there are sufficient numbers who are not, then maybe the idea of journalistic integrity isn't really much of a thing. Maybe it's just this idea that we have that's not really being addressed and doesn't really exist in the way that we think it does. And so therefore, we need people, we need these alternatives. So that's where I am. I like, this is why I podcast. I think we need alternatives. We need people to challenge these ideas. And I've challenged even citizen journalists. There's citizen journalists. There's one that comes to mind who I've seen in the last 2 months be wrong on like 3 major topics. And I'm like, you need to go and figure out what you're doing because you have been wrong multiple times. And this is, I'm talking about somebody who has said, I made a mistake, right? Like they acknowledged it. I'm not just saying it. They acknowledged it. Okay, great. But you've been wrong on 3 issues. Like we should not tolerate this idea that you can be wrong on 3 major issues and still say you've got some level of integrity. Something is amiss somewhere, and you need to figure out what it is. Maybe you're just doing sloppy work. Maybe you're ignoring things that, that don't lead you to a comfortable conclusion. Whatever the case, and this is how we challenge ideas, right? We won't worry about it. Like, okay, you're a citizen journalist, fine. I want you to be right. Period. You should be wrong, like on a very, very infrequent basis. Like, because the more you talk, the more likely you're going to be wrong. The more you put things out there, right? The more articles you write, the more podcasts you do, the more everything. You're bound to be wrong somewhere, right? And that's okay. It's okay to be wrong. But within the scope of what you're doing, we need to start saying, all right, well, how wrong are you and on what? If you're wrong on some minor details that don't really change the the outcome or the perception of a particular issue, then that's not as bad as if you were totally wrong on an idea and the what you should have the perspective that you were or the elements that you were wrong about would have led to an entirely different perception. That's a big deal. So so I think we should challenge it. And I think we should, Sam Harris and everybody, nobody gets a break. Whether you're the president, whether you're a public intellectual, or whether you're just some guy who wakes up early in the morning and says, you know what, I'm going to yap in front of a microphone and a camera because people apparently like to hear what I have to say. Like, it doesn't matter who you are, challenge the ideas. So, speaking of integrity, oh, no, I didn't get to that clip yet. Let's see. Should we play that? Let's see. We're getting low on time here. Should we continue on? No, I'm not going to continue. I think I made my point with that video clip. There's a little bit more, but I think you get the gist. Let's move over and let's wrap this up by talking about Trump's one of his more recent picks, the director of FBI nominee. I said that so awkwardly. The nominee for director of the FBI, Kash Patel. So who is this guy? Well, he's the former federal prosecutor at the U.S. Department of Justice. He is former chief of staff, or he was the former chief of staff to the Secretary of Defense during Trump's first presidency. He is a former U.S. National Security Council official, and he's a former senior advisor to the acting director of national intelligence. So it sounds to me like he has the credentials to talk and about the FBI, and more importantly, lead the FBI. So it sounds like he's legit. I know I just talking about credentials, but in some sense, like he's not just some guy that just got promoted because Trump likes him. He's more than that. He at least has experience in what appears to be relevant areas. That doesn't mean he's going to be good. That just means like, okay, on first glance, maybe not a bad pick. So I want to play this video because I thought it was very interesting.
The FBI's footprint has gotten so freaking big, and the biggest problem the FBI has come out of its intel shops. I'd break that component out of it. I'd shut down the FBI Hoover building on day one and reopening the next day as a museum of the deep state. And I'd take the 7,000 employees that work in that building and send them across America to chase down criminals. Go be cops. You're cops. Go be cops. Go chase down murderers and drug dealers and violent offenders. What do you need 7,000 people there for? Same thing with DOJ. What are all these people doing here? Looking for their next government promotion, looking for their next fancy government title, looking for their parachute out of government. So while you're bringing in the right people, you also have to shrink government.
All right. Sounds great. I love it. And now here's the thing. Nothing is certain until it happens. So he's talking about what he would do if he could. And, that's more than just, hey, appoint me and I'll make this happen. It's a little more than that. But, it's a start. It's a good start. And it's for the right reasons. That's the really big thing. So he's right. You ask any business owner, what is your biggest expense? They're going to tell you labor. Every company that I've ever worked for, when they're looking to cut cost, one of the first things they start with is labor. How many heads do we have? Do we need this? Do we need 15 people in this department, or can we do it with 10? Right? Like, this is standard, and it should equally apply to the government. And we should always be looking and saying, all right, well, maybe we've hired too many. All right. Maybe we've hired, like, one reason that companies might hire, have too many heads, is that they're doing well for a particular year or two, or maybe they get some new business and they're like, all right, we're going to have to, add more people. And then they add more people and that's going well. And then it gets to a point where they become more efficient. They've got better ways of doing things. Maybe they've lost some business, whatever. There's any number of reasons why they go from, hey, we need, all these employees, to, nope, turns out we don't need all these employees. And sometimes they don't need them in the first place, arguably. When Elon Musk bought Twitter, since we were talking about him a moment ago, he laid off about 80% of Twitter employees. And he went from like 8,000 to like 1,500 employees. And so you have to ask yourself, like, well, what was the impact? Initially, and I remember this, people on Twitter were like, oh, tonight's the last night. Twitter's going to go down tomorrow. They don't have enough people. They're not going to be able to run Twitter anymore. And the next day came and everybody's still on Twitter. Right. And people have been on Twitter since. And there've been, one or two major outages, which I don't think lasted very long. And you could argue if that had anything to do with the employees being let go, but I doubt it. So ultimately, it sounded like Elon Musk was right. There were way too many people at Twitter. So if there's way too many people at Twitter, and we tend to think that businesses are more efficient with how they use money than government, then what is the overhead that needs to be slashed over at, like, say, the FBI or anywhere? He mentioned the Department of Justice as well. What is the overhead there? And what could they be doing? If we're going to keep them, what could they be doing so that they're providing some level of value? Now, if they're out there chasing, actual criminals, violent criminals, people that have, assaulted people and stabbed people and all these other, like, if they're hunting down those people, that's a good use of them. If they're not, if they're just administrative and just doing a bunch of paperwork and, getting, finding opportunities for people to get in trouble over paperwork, like, I don't know, maybe when you go to fill out a form and it says, do you use drugs because you want this gun? And like, do we need those people? No, we don't, because we didn't need the law in the first place, right? I established that earlier. So I think there's a case to be made that chances are the FBI has way too many people, and some of them probably simply and plainly need to be let go. And we don't even have to look and say, you're a bad employee. We can just say, hey, look, you're not providing the value that we need. End of story. We got to cut cost. First thing we need to do is look at, all the heads. What are you doing? Are you providing value? Okay, great. Then we'll keep you. If you're not providing value, then we're going to let you go. And it might take revising what we think of as a value add. A value add should be going after violent criminals. That's a value add. Most everything else, probably not, because it's probably just like what I call administrative crimes. I'm not interested in prosecuting people for administrative crime. I'm not interested in putting them in jail or federal prison for administrative crimes. That's just absurd. We can do better than that as a country. And if we want to talk about public intellectuals, how about we start questioning some of these processes and things that we have embedded in our system? We should ask in the same way that we should ask and say, are journalists really, is there something like journalistic integrity? Is there a thing of academic integrity? Or is it just this idea that we have that we hold dear to, but doesn't really exist in the real world? We just like to say it does, right? We should challenge that. That's part of challenging ideas. We should also challenge the idea of, hey, do we need this much government? Do we need this many people? Do we need these laws into place? And what's the consequences of removing these laws? And then following that, the consequences of removing people that were dedicated to seeking out and enforcing those laws. These are the kind of questions that we should be having. And that would make perfect and proper public discourse. And I think that would be a good place for somebody to rise up as a star and become a public intellectual and say, look, everything is on the table. No idea is so sacred that we can't challenge it. We're going to challenge everything, all of it, put it on the table. And if it can stand the rigor, then it stays. If it can't stand the rigor, then it goes. And it doesn't matter whether it's the public sector or the private sector, right? We're going to Marie Kondo that crap. Okay, let's get some comments here. Providing value, wouldn't that discount the entirety of the government? I mean, mostly depends on if you're an anarchist, the answer to that will be yes. If you're not an anarchist, then your answer will be no, but it might be that, like, for people like me, who I am not an anarchist, I would say almost the entirety of the government. Well, here's what I like to tell people. The federal government should be about the size of my city council, right? Like, because for me, the scope of what they should be doing should be that narrow, that we don't need much more than the size of a city council from a major city. That's to me the size of the federal government, or what it should be. It's not what it is. It's a behemoth right now. And this is what, again, asking questions. These are the questions to ask. Let's see what else we got here. Fed cops. Is that really a good idea? Not for everyday regular crimes like, assault and battery and, murder and stuff like that. I think they might have a value if you're looking for somebody that's a criminal in multiple states, has crossed, borders, and you want somebody. I do appreciate the idea of jurisdiction. So I don't know that I want a county police officer from Florida going all the way over to California to catch somebody, right? That might be guilty. Like, in dealing with the extradition and saying, hey, you committed a crime over here, you need to come back over and you need to face the consequences. Like, you beat up this man and put him in the hospital, and then you fled to another state. Yes, we're going to set a federal agent after you to bring your butt back, and then hand you over to the local police. And then from there, the local police and the local government can give you the proper trial or whatever, right? Like, so I think there is a place for it. But again, much, much, much smaller, right? And I'm not going to try to go through all the different scenarios, but I think we can conceive of scenarios where it would be a good thing. But again, for me, I want to really focus on violent crimes. I'm not interested in, what do we call that? What's that phrase? It's a there's a phrase and I'm drawing a blank on it. But anyway, nonviolent crimes, administrative crimes. I'm not interested in those, right? Like, those aren't a big deal to me. I want people that have hurt people, stole their stuff. I want those people to be our focus. All right, let's see. What else we got in here? So Alex Jones would or would not be a public intellectual. Well, I think that depends on what the public has deemed to be an intellectual. Personally, in my opinion, I wouldn't call him an intellectual. He's been right on many things, but he's also been wildly wrong on many things. And so then we have to kind of take that into consideration and say, like, how often are you correct? What ideas are you challenging? Are you challenging all ideas or just the ones you don't like? So I think there's a number of things, but ultimately, I think that's going to be something up to the public. We can all have our personal opinions, but public intellectual, well, that means just that, public. All right, folks, let's wrap this up. Tomorrow, let me ask you, do you ever wonder if people like me regret their vote? I voted for Chase Oliver. Do I regret that? Should people regret their vote for Trump based on some of the picks that are coming out for the nominees that he's making, or some of the ideas that he's presenting? Should people, should they look back and say, man, I regret voting for him? How do you make decisions and limit later or future regrets? So we're going to talk about decision making tomorrow. And then Friday, got a special guest. I will have Spike Cohen on. I will probably do something in the morning that's very, very short, just so that we keep consistency with the 7:30 a.m. but I will have him on at noon. So kind of mark your calendars for this Friday, noon. Spike Cohen, we're going to talk about what's going on currently with his organization, You Are the Power. And then we're going to get some of his best advice for activists who are seeking to have an impact in the world around them. So look forward to that on Friday. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching. I hope you found this episode informative and inspiring. Be sure to catch me Monday through Friday, 7:30 a.m. for an informed discussion on politics and culture. Make sure you're subscribed to my YouTube channel, or if you prefer my Rumble channel, you can go to youtube.libertydad.com or rumble.libertydad.com. While you're there, let me know how I'm doing by leaving me a comment. Last but not least, I want you to remember, if you're a champion of liberty, your business is people and your product is liberty. I want you to have a great week. Catch you tomorrow. But for now, I'm out.